Right. Today I'm going to discuss about ServiceNow development side in context to the API part, because in the previous sessions I discussed about ServiceNow development perspective uh, for various IT services management like CSM, legal service deliveries, right? So compliance risk management, all that in the previous classes. Wherein today I am going to discuss about, because uh, you're all new to the service now development, right? So because I could see some people who are new to even IT, even because you want to make your career in service now and all. So in this regard, so first of all, being into the development side, one should understand about what are the different APIs will be there. So this is where generally you can see it on the screen. When it comes to the service now development itself is concerned, there are different APIs will be used. So before I'm getting into that, let me explain you what APIs are being used. APIs are nothing but application programming interfaces. That is something useful to connect two different applications. Means if you want to come develop any communication between two different applications, APIs is what something which normally we will be using. In this regard, so normally there are different APIs will be created, like something like Web API, RESTful API, SOAP API, all that. In this regard, so there are different RESTful APIs to we have, right? So different RESTful APIs will be created in this regard. So the first one about account API. Account API majorly the one which enable us to retrieve and as well as update the customer service management account records. Because when there is any customer CSM, as far as CSM module is concerned under service now, whenever we are using, it is always important for us to update the RESTful API. Maybe, for example, if you want to retrieve any kind of data, customer data, or if you want to provide any customer services, etc., all that stuff, right? So whenever we are using this customer services, all that, and if you want to retrieve or update the account records of the customers, what we are managing in the module of service now, this is what something for that account API is what something which we have to be created. Next, activity subscription APIs. Activity subscription APIs majorly focusing on the endpoints, wherein this is something useful for us to retrieve the activity entities and all everything from the subscriptions, as well as the kind of activity feed frameworks and all everything, right? So whatever the subscriptions are we making, so that managing of subscriptions and all everything comes under activity subscription API. So the next one about the agent client collector API, because this is where generally it provides an endpoints for us to manage the actions which are available on the agents and managing the policies, all that, right? So what are the different policies we have, right? So whatever the different available agents do we have to manage the customer services, etc. To even for that generally this agent client collection API is being used. Next API is aggregate API. Aggregate API majorly provide us to allow to clear and as well as compute aggregate statistics about the existing tables or the columns what we have, because there are different columns are we going to maintain, there are different existing tables you are going to maintain. In this regard, if you want to aggregate statistics and all everything, aggregate API is something which is being used. Next, after that, AI search enabled user mapping API, because this majorly used the endpoints which majorly enable us to ingestion for user mapping information, wherein from whatever the kind of external resources do we have into the service now. So this is where generally external usage mapping API is what something which is being used for. Next is alarm management API, which majorly used to create and update retrieving the data from the events, whatever we have created so far. So for that generally purpose, alarm management open API is being used. And last but not least, of course, there were many, but major APIs I'm explaining to you in today's session. One more about the application service API, because this is something used, because when being into the development side, service node development side, as in when I'm showing you the documentation, service node documentation is concerned, generally service APIs, majorly we used application service APIs, we have to create. So we need to develop a communication between two different applications, or if you want to create or update or modify any kind of application services. Either if you want to use a method called get method or put method or update method, right? So if you want to use any kind of methods and all, for this application service API is what something which normally we will be using in regular interfaces. So this is also one of the API which normally use. So being into the service now development, one of the major API what we are using is this application service API is what something will be using. This is one. So service now. And next is batch API is important because this batch APIs and all everything will be provided different batch files do we have, right? So if you want to maintain any kind of single request for multiple REST API calls, or if you want to maintain any kind of returns and responses and payloads and all. So batch API is also one of the key and important element we have to use. So batch APIs at the same time application APIs and all. So these are the two major APIs being into ServiceNow development we have to use. Remaining were there because alarm management or aggregate APIs and all everything are required. But generally aggregate API, this is majorly used by the database team because if there is any administrator roles and all everything were there. So admin roles will be used this data API majorly, right? So comparing to other people and all. So this is being used majorly by the admin teams will be used more of this aggregate API and all. So major usage from the developer side, if you say application service API is one thing. At the same time, applications API, and the next is about batch API is what something which normally we will be using. So to create APIs so that whatever the communication you are going to develop with ServiceNow with some other any application, right? So for example, if you want to raise the tickets and all, ServiceNow is being used. In addition to that, if you are connecting to any kind of application, something like Jira or any ERP or CRM applications, so this API creation is what something we have to be performed being a developer, right? So this is all about the session today, right? So if you have any questions, please go ahead.